I want people to know that man is always going to let us down, even the people that God uses, but God never does. Never.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Raised and Redeemed podcast and YouTube channel. I'm your host, Michaela Nikolenko, and I started this show after finally finding my home in Christ. I grew up in a home with lots of abuse and addiction where Christianity became something that repelled me. I spent my early adulthood seeking God in other religions, tarot cards, psychedelics, and even myself. I didn't realize how much hell I had pulled up into my life until I came face to face with the dark side of the spirit world, and Jesus fought hard to save me. Now I live to serve His will and host a platform where others can share their story too. If you're looking for a show that talks about real things and provides encouragement for those who have been to the dark side and back, this is the show for you. Make sure to rate, subscribe, and share this show with anyone that you feel might be encouraged by it too. Thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to the Raised and Redeemed family. Hey you guys, and welcome back to the Raised and Redeemed podcast and YouTube channel. I'm your host, Michaela Nikolenko, and this is episode 1 of season 2, but technically episode 29 of the Raised and Redeemed podcast altogether. I hope you guys had an amazing holiday season and are excited for another new year. I know that I am, and that's why I wanted to start the season off with a bang by the first guest being social media superstar Ashley Henriette. If you've been on any side of Christian Instagram or Christian TikTok, I'm sure you've come across Ashley's content at least once before. This was a super relatable conversation for me, as Ashley also grew up in a home with lots of abuse and addiction and is now on the other side to tell about it. Her story is full of redemption and just countless times of God showing up in people to help her out of different situations, and then those same people turning around and being the ones to let her down later on. And whereas that might be something that turns people away from the church and Jesus altogether, Ashley's just been filled with so much grace where it's those same situations that lead her closer to Jesus than ever before, because He's the only one that will never let us down. So without further ado, let's get on to the episode. Okay, so for the listeners to know, Ashley is a life coach, speaker, author, podcast host of Confidence in Coffee, and TikTok superstar with over 200,000 fans. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with the Raised and Redeemed fam today.
Well, I'm honored, and I love that your podcast is called Raised and Redeemed, right? That's all of our stories, no matter how different. So that's really good. I'm super excited to be here. We've already had a great conversation. So
I know. I was like, we have to get recording on this because it was already getting so good.
Yeah, let's press it.
Okay, so we were starting to get into some of this before I hit record, but how I started to realize that we relate so much more than I even realized when I invited you to be a guest on the show. So I'm really excited to go into some of that. Just a little bit of background. I did find out that you had a childhood full of trauma, were abandoned by your father, had a drug-addicted mom, and experienced lots of different verbal, sexual, and mental abuse in your early years.
Yes.
But now, as we're talking about, you're here 20 years later with this massive success, 7+ years happily married, and 4 healthy children. So talk about the redemption of God, because like you said, only He could do that.
Only He could do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to go a little bit deeper into your story today. And to start, just going back to the beginning, would you mind telling us a little bit about your childhood just to start?
Yeah. So everybody, I want to first start off by saying that everybody has a story, and everybody experiences trauma or hurt or pain or brokenness. And the enemy is such a liar. And so I think that when you hear my story, I want to be able to validate other people's story that may look at that and be like, wow, I didn't go through that, and be afraid to tell their story. And so I want to encourage your listeners that what I'm about to share doesn't mean that your story isn't going to glorify God in some other way that I couldn't. But I my story is definitely something that is dynamic,
Mm.
and it's a lot to take in. My mother is full of addiction. I look at redemption as not this Hollywood happy ending of everyone is sober, everyone is happy, go lucky, we're all together. My mother still struggles with addiction. But
Mhm.
what's great is I have forgiven her. And the happy ending is the fact that I love her, I forgive her, I feel sorry for her. I'm not the victim here, and I have compassion for someone who has caused me so much pain,
Mhm.
right? Same with my stepfather, who was very abusive. And the reason he was abusive was because he had feelings for me that he hated and he
Mhm.
projected onto that. He was perverted. He would watch me take showers. He molested me. I mean, we're going to dive right deep in here.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You just tell me when to stop.
No, it's
Lord
good.
Jesus, carry this conversation where you want it to go. But yeah, I went through a life of like I had a mark on my head. So I was supposed to be an abortion. My mother, whose father committed suicide and whose mother was also an alcoholic, and that was just the generation of toxicity, right?
Yeah.
Um, she also struggled with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Now, I
Mhm.
didn't know this years ago. I'm able to put language to what I went through, and so with that, like my mother was not healthy. So she went through numerous men. There was five of us, and four of us have different fathers.
Mhm.
She had had numerous abortions and numerous miscarriages, and I was supposed to be that abortion, but she said, "Stop. I can't do this again." And she had me, and she loved me, and I'm so stinking grateful for that. But in that, my real father, who I didn't find out was my real father till I was 13, he would had wanted nothing to do with me, just nothing. And so my mother, going from men to men, had that's when she had met my stepfather, who was 15 years younger than her.
Mm.
He was a child.
Yeah.
And here's this woman with two kids because she had a daughter before me from a one night stand who my grandmother adopted. And so my future was starting off as like, you know,
Yeah.
failure. Like this girl's not going to get anywhere in her life.
Yeah.
And there for a while I didn't. So coming from a childhood like that and then growing up, at some point I believed, and I remember the moment I was sitting in a chair. I was 15, I was 14 at the time. I remember sitting in a chair and from being abused, physically abused, molestation, like I tried so hard to be a good girl. I remember trying to make good grades. I made everyone love me. I was even when I would go trick or treating and be like, whatever you want to give me. And
Mm.
that was the spirit that I carried. But I remember the moment that I was sitting in a chair and my stepdad just kept slapping me. Like that was his form of like smile or I'm going to hit you, stop
Mhm.
crying or I'm going to hit you. And I remember the moment where it's like I finally just broke and I was like, you know what? I am what you say I am. I am bad. I am a whore. I am a slut. I'll never be good enough. I remember looking at him and I think that he knew it. And I was like, you know what? I don't care if you kill me. I don't care. Hit me again. I don't care. And I remember the smirk on his face. And from that moment on, I hung out with people that I thought that would
Mhm.
accept me. I was hungry for belonging, and I was going to get it wherever and however I could. And in that led me to things happening to me. I was raped and I was thrown at a gas station because I went to a party that my ex boyfriend told me to go to. My first love, who my stepdad destroyed that relationship because he was so jealous. He was so
Mm.
controlling. So he would tell my only puppy love that I was cheating on him when I was stuck in my room because he wouldn't let me go. And so I remember he used to mess with me and be like, "You're a lesbian, you're a lesbian." And I did do things that until I can remember with other girls. I didn't know why. I didn't know
Mhm.
why. I remember watching porn at 6 years old. I was just so exposed to that environment.
Yeah.
And finally, after being broken up with him, going to this party, and I was raped at a gas station. I hated men. I didn't trust men. I didn't trust boys. So, what's crazy is like these people, I didn't go looking for them, and I feel led to say this if that's okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't be like I'm going to search these people out, right? Like I'm going to search this bad guy out, this good girl out. Every time I tried to get somewhere in my life, Michaela, every time there was a tiny little bit of hope or love, the enemy just came in and destroyed it. And
Mm,
the reason I say that is I go through all of this, I meet a great guy, ugh, right? It goes to crap.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, and then in that, I was a mess after that. I had been exposed to drugs. I was skipping school. I wasn't making good grades. My grandmother, when I tried to unalive myself, because I had just given up on myself,
Yeah.
she intervened. And my mother was so scared of my father hurting me that they waited till he went to work to move me out of the house. They never did that with any other kid. And I never understood that. And so
Mhm.
I was in love with my grandmother. My grandmother was everything to me. She was my normalcy. She was my stability. And I moved in with her and I remember getting down on my knees and being like, okay, God, this is it. This is it. Like, I'm going to be a good girl. And I would go back to church. I was the only one in my family who would walk to church by myself. I was called a
Wow.
church hopper. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew my mom believed in Jesus. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you, Lord. I'm telling you. Okay. Doesn't matter. God will use whatever and whoever to plant seeds.
I was
And
gonna ask you that actually, like what your family believed, if there was any kind of church.
yeah, so my mother loves Jesus. Like I know where she's going when she dies. She's gonna go to heaven. I know it. God has told me this. Um, and she's exposed us to church. Now, my stepfather, he didn't really start believing in God until I was like I was 19.
Mhm.
I remember he would always make fun of us for going. He never really went to church with us. Home life was hell. And so my mother did believe in God. She believed in the Holy Spirit, and she had took us to church. And so we believed in God. My siblings, there's four of us. I have two of them who don't believe in God, who
Mhm.
just believe in life.
Yeah.
Um, and I pray for them daily because we all went to church together. And I'm grateful for that time that we did, and my mom did that because she struggled with things that I can't imagine, uh, and she was very abusive, just as well as my stepfather. Um, but I see them both from a different light, and my grandmother she also believed in God. My grandmother was a Sunday school teacher,
Okay.
but she was also an alcoholic,
What do you
really
think that
bad.
is really quick? Because my mom loves Jesus so much. She breathes the Bible. Like she knows the Bible is so true, but she struggles with addiction and she always falls back into it. So I'm like, I don't know if it's like a struggle with obedience. If it's just like the pain of this world is so bad that they just continue to fall back into numbing with substances. Like, what do you think that is to where somebody can know the hope and love of Jesus, but still be stuck in addiction?
Yeah, so I think that's different for everybody because there's a lot of mental and traumas that are connected to that. And I'm not a therapist.
Yeah.
But what I've learned in working in a Christ based drug rehabilitation center with my husband, who was an addict, and we worked with men who struggled with addiction.
Mm.
Um, you, these your mom, my mom, they want to do good. Think about it. Nobody wants to do bad.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be an evil villain like you see on Disney movies. Nobody wants to do that. Now, is there evil in this world? Yeah, it's disgusting. There's darkness in this world that, there's certain people that I struggle there. I'm like, you don't deserve to live for what you've done, right?
Mhm.
But overall, and when it comes to addiction, I believe that they fall back into it for numerous reasons. And one is that they haven't really dealt with the issues that are causing them to go back into that, right? So
Mm.
they know the solution is Jesus and they know surface solutions. They know surface problems, but they haven't really dealt with the root
Mhm.
problem. And until they actually deal with the root pain of what is triggering them to want to do that, to want to continue to feed into that fleshly desire, to, you know, feed into that sickness, they're going to constantly relapse because they're not fully giving in to healing in whatever form that is.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but that doesn't mean that their heart's not redeemed. Like, I remember begging God. I was just like, why does she keep doing this? And I remember the Lord's like, she's mine and I love her. She's my daughter
Wow.
and I'm going to meet her at the gate, but she's going to struggle in this world because she's gone. Her mind is gone from drugs. She's in her 50s, and statistically, women that are in their 50s don't change. We actually don't change after the age of 7. It's true. We really don't. Our personality is literally formed at a prime age. And then after that, like, we adapt, we grow, but we don't really change. That
Yeah.
is our personality. And my mother's father committed suicide and she found him, right? My grandmother was an alcoholic. And so my mother's prime personality, her disorders were long ago.
Yeah.
And so, and also there's outwardly things like my mother didn't we don't talk about mental illness. They
Mhm.
didn't talk about it like we do now, right? You
Right.
didn't talk about bipolar disorder. You didn't talk about anxiety. You didn't talk about ADHD. We didn't just give 'em medication. Think about it.
Yeah.
In their time, I don't know how your mom is, but in my time, my mother was, like that was when they just gave drugs away for free.
Yeah, that's true.
They created addiction.
Yeah.
And so that is feeding the pain. And so there's a lot of conflict there. So my mother, I know in my heart, will never ever be sober-minded in this world. She never will be. She will never be right. She will never be able to function in society. But
Yeah.
I know that Jesus is going to meet that little girl at the gate and hold her and be like, "I'm here."
If you're in a relationship and trying to figure out if he's the one, or maybe you're recently single and taking a step back to figure out how to best go about finding the one, I have the ebook for you. Head over to the link in my bio or in the comment section from wherever you're listening to find my latest ebook, How to Know If He's the One. In this ebook, I share the worst of my relational mistakes and how Jesus finally showed me there was a better way. Gradually, he began to mend my heart, and I know he will do the same for you too. That's
I'm
so
here.
good. That brings me so much like peace because both of my parents still struggle with addiction. Um, and I pray
I'm
for
so
them all
sorry.
the time. Yeah, yeah, it's okay. I feel like I kind of adapted to the parent figure for them where like I'm I'm
Oh,
that, I'm that role for them and it takes some pressure off because my mom, she's had crazy God dreams of like where he's redeemed her. Like, I know he's fighting for her. I know he loves her. My dad, he doesn't really think about God. So, like, that's a different situation with him. Um, but regardless, like, it brings me peace to know that somebody can continue to disobey, but still be God's and still be redeemed. And um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and the fact that your mom has so my mother's been brought to life. We've seen her purple and blue. Like, that woman, God has given her so many chances. We've seen our mother dead. We've seen her be resuscitated, from drugs, and I still see her she's not living, she's surviving. My mother can speak in tongues. My mother can tell you the Bible from the front to the back. I have 4 kids, and 2 are actually not my husband's. Their father is an addict, and he taught me the Bible before he up and abandoned his children. We had Bible study every day when I became a Christian. And so I've learned something in that. I've learned that there is genuinely a battle between our flesh and our spirit. Um, and our flesh is triggered by certain traumas and responses, and that is where the church has failed in regard of not talking about mental illness and
Mhm.
addiction and surface level healing. And
Yeah.
so that is why I have come, because I know God's like, you know, we're going to talk about the hard stuff
Mhm.
because I'm healing. I have traumas. I have PTSD, anxiety. There are mental things going on, and I have been a victim of surface healing. And so when my behaviors weren't matching up with what people were telling me to do, I
Mhm.
almost killed myself. I
Yeah.
thought, I'm a failure. I'm actually Judas. I'm supposed to kill myself. I genuinely thought my destiny was to unalive myself because I would never, ever be what God wanted me to do.
What I love about your story is that, you didn't get a hardened heart through all of this. Like, you went through that. Well, and we're leading up to your salvation. I want to know like how you were saved or like how that happened. But as a little girl, like it seems like when you moved in with your grandma, going back to your story, um, you you prayed to God, like you cried out to God, or not moved in with your grandma, but you were saying
I
something.
did. It ended up very not good. Like, but God redeemed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I prayed to God about that. I went back to church. I met this boy who was a Christian, but his mother found a pack of cigarettes in my purse and thought, "You're not good enough for my son." And went to the skating rink every Friday, and there was like a gay group there, and I wore a rainbow choker, not knowing what that meant. I
Okay.
was so ignorant. Okay, and they were just very drawn to me, and I loved the attention. I was like, okay, like
Yeah.
I'm pretty. But they had their hand. There was this one who was way older than me. She actually shouldn't have been there, and she this was in the midst of my grandmother, and she was like in my life, and I was trying to go to church, and I was trying to be a good girl, but then I got rejected again, and I went to where what was drawing me. And every time I even try to come out of that with the group that I was in, she wouldn't let anybody near me. She had already claimed me as hers, and I
Mm,
was too afraid, but also kind of drawn to the false security that I had with this woman.
yeah.
And she was grown. Okay, she was like in her 20s. I was
Yeah.
like 16. Um, and I just remember kind of being drawn to that. So when I got rejected, I stopped going to church. I like was like, okay, God, here we go again.
Mm,
I started doing drugs, and I remember my grandmother was still struggling with drinking, but not as bad. And one night when I was supposed to go out, she asked me to get her a glass of wine, and I took the whole bottle up there. I was like, "You're a grown woman. Like, I'm not going to keep pouring your wine." And I took it up there, and I came home, and she was drank the whole bottle. She busted her head, had to go to the hospital, and it went downhill from there. And then I found out she took all my money. My
mm,
mother was coming in and out of my life, so I was trying to have this relationship with my mother. My grandmother felt threatened, and I was back at my parents' house. And then I was in a full blown, I hate men. I can't
mm,
trust anybody. This is who I am. And that is
mm,
what led me into my toxic relationship that I was in. And that's when I dropped out of school and got bad on drugs. And the only way out of that relationship um, was with her brother.
mm.
Yeah, who was the only person she trusted me around, and he knew it. I wasn't allowed. She watched me work. She watched me outside my classes. One time I was in a parade when I tried to go back to school, and she would follow me all the way from the parade so I didn't talk to anybody.
So what was the story with her brother then? That was your next relationship was her brother?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
he was my friend for years. He's actually the father of my children, my two older
Okay.
children. Mhm,
Wow.
mhm.
So
Um,
she's their aunt.
yes, yeah, but they don't know him because he left.
Yeah.
Um, and we were engaged and everything. Like I had a dress. Like that's what led me to North Carolina. We moved from Alabama to North
Mm,
Carolina, and that's where I met God. Was in the middle of the country where you see more bear and deer than you do people. That I ran there with my ex in a trailer where the floors were falling through. And I remember seeing a church called Cabin Swamp in the country, and I was so desperate. And I had this 6-month-old baby because I thought a baby would save me, and this would save me. Um, and I just found all these ways to try to get out because I was so stuck. And that's where I got saved and baptized, and that's where I got
wow.
my godly family who passed recently, who took me in and my son. And that's where I got my GED. That's where I went to college. That's where I
Mm,
started teaching. And I even fell back then. I got pregnant again and engaged. I was like, I need to get engaged. But then I fasted with Kathy, who was my godly mother at the time. And she's like, "Look, we need to fast." She was, like, on heart dialysis, like, she was not good, but she's like, "We're gonna fast one day because you are so torn about this." And I was like, "God is gonna make me happy.
okay.
God is gonna just make me happy with him." And I knew I didn't love him, but I have 2 kids with him, you know? And so we fasted, and then God had me write. He literally put my son to sleep. It was, like, 4 o'clock in the afternoon one afternoon, my ex was gone, and I wrote, and I remember God telling me, like, "He is not for you, he's to go, and you are not to follow. I will redeem him. You and the boys will be okay." And I called off the engagement. I called off all the plans, all the money we spent on the wedding. The
Wow.
dress I was supposed to wear for our marriage, I wore for my husband now.
Okay.
It was meant
The
for him.
dress was redeemed too.
All of it. Jesus cares about all the little things. Like
Yeah.
my bed, like all the things that I shared with him were gone. Like God replaced everything when I went to a new church. And yeah, that's my
Hmm.
story is dynamic.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there.
There is. But
Uh,
that's how I got saved. I remember like looking at a poster of Jesus because I had my 6-month-old son in this country church. And I think maybe I shared a little bit of it on TikTok. But I looked at this poster when that day, I looked at my son. I was like, I don't know where I'm going to go if I leave this church. I don't know if I'm going to go to hell or heaven. And I have raised my hand 20 times when they tell you to raise your hand,
mm,
but I've never been baptized. And every time I was introduced to be baptized my whole life, I never did. I
okay.
never, I it was too much of a commitment, but I knew it was time. But I had no idea what it was. I thought you had to do all these steps. And the pastor laughed at me. I was like, no, I think I have to do all this to get baptized. He's like, no, that's not how this works. And so that night, I tried to get my ex to come and watch me get baptized because we were still trying to work things out. And he was my security blanket. It takes time to heal. We don't just get saved and like
Yeah.
everything is transformed. I don't want people to get that image, but God is with us through all of it. He literally never leaves us, no matter what we do. He will never leave us. He is always faithful.
Mm,
Um, and so I got baptized that night, but I was 20 minutes late because I wasn't going to go. And I was so torn because my ex didn't want me to go. He's like, plan it another time. But I just felt
mm.
like they're waiting for me. And so I packed all my clothes. I was like, let me just go tell them that I'm going to do it another time. The pastor was waiting by the door. This small little country church. There was 20 people. They were standing up like they knew I was coming. I was like 20 minutes. It was raining. I'll never forget it. And I come in and he grabs me. Like, wait, he looks up. I'll never forget it. He looks up and he's like he knew. Like God had him wait. And I go in the door. So I was like, look, I'm not. And he's like, yes, you are. And then I remember
Oh
me and
my
my son
god.
getting baptized, and that poster I was
Okay.
talking about, there was a poster of Jesus, those little images of Jesus,
Yeah.
and I look at the poster and I'm like, okay, this is it. I want you. I want all of you. I'm ready. I'm ready. I knew in that moment I was ready to commit my life to him, and I did. I fell back, but I never ever left him. I
Mhm.
strived for him even in my downfalls, and he was always with me. And it goes on, but here I am today with an amazing man, amazing children, and I'm honored to do what God has called me to do that gives him nothing but glory by sharing my story like I am here.
So your story is just, yeah, it's so cool, and I just feel so blessed to be getting to know you right now. And I'm relating to so much of what you're saying, and I know that the listeners will too. And something that I'm feeling, that I'm like getting from your story too, is just God's grace. Like you said, like you weren't just perfect right after you got saved. Um, and then I don't know exactly what you mean when you say like you fell back a little bit after you got saved, but I definitely want to know more about that. I know
Yeah.
I kind of experienced that too. Of I fell back into a little bit of partying and boys and stuff like this, even after I was saved. And I was just telling my husband about it the other day, how I had started to backslide a little bit before I met him. My husband now, he's like the backslide police, so I never
I
get a
love that.
good. But like our conversation started with this, like even people who struggle with addiction, like God has still claimed you. You're still his. Even when you're saved and you're his and you fall back a little bit, like he still loves you. He never leaves you. Um so yeah, I would love to just keep hearing more about what happened after that.
Yeah, so yeah, I in that like it's like a baby, okay? It's like having a baby. They're the most precious thing in the whole world. But they do some crazy stuff like wipe poop on the walls, right? And like get on the Christmas tree 1,000 times after you tell them no. But we don't stop loving our children, right? Like
Mm,
we don't give up on them. We don't stop taking care of them. We don't stop meeting them where they are. God is that for us 10 times fold. Once we have him in our hearts, once we truly receive him, There is no getting away from him, even if he wanted to. He will rip everything out. Like, we will get our kids, we will ground them, we will take all their privileges, we will take everything away because we love them. God
Wow.
does the same with us, okay? And he did that. And when I talk about backslid, I still had my ex. I moved out, and I shared part of this story on social media on TikTok about just like a little part of it when I started going to that church. Got saved, I got baptized, I connected with a few of the people there. They threw me a baby shower that I always wanted. I never had. I didn't even know they were going to do that. They didn't even know that I had no diapers. I had no clothes for my kids or for my son. And I just remember being so moved when they surprised me Wednesday night, the whole church, with this baby shower that, I was like, I always wanted one, and I never got it. Um, and, I just became really connected in that church. And then one of the girls in particular who took me to the baby shower and who helped take me to church and who helped me when my pipes froze would let me shower at her house and gave me a journal. um, I talk about these people specifically, even in my book, because I want people to know that man is always going to let us down, even the people that God uses, but God never does, never.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so this woman who really did so much for me and really, like, I didn't even know how to break bread. I thought this was a cult. When they were passing around some bread and some bread, I'm like, what is this? Like, I remember looking back and like, what? I need to go. Like, what are y'all doing? And like, I knew God, but not like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so in that, like, I just got connected. She laughed at me. And one time she took me to lunch and with her fiance, and we were hanging out, and I'm just so oblivious. I'm like hanging out with our little babies that are the same age because she's a young mom too. I got pregnant when I was 19. And so I was 20 at the time, and she was like 20 as well. Like, we were the same age. And she was so quiet on taking me home. And then the Sunday afterwards, normally they grab my baby, they didn't touch him, and they covered the seat of the aisle that I sat on with them, this whole group of people.
Mhm.
And I felt so rejected.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I did, but it was so different. So I sat across, and I remember crying because I thought, again, again, God,
Yeah.
again, you give me hope. You gave me hope with this boy. You gave me hope with my grandmother. You gave me hope with my ex. You gave me hope in North Carolina. Again, again in church, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in the aisle, and I was holding my son, and we get up, we worship. It was a very conservative church, okay? So you didn't like lift your hands up, you didn't do any of that. And I never really did that. I was exposed to that with my mom because she was all about like the
Yeah.
move of the Lord when she did go to church. So I was exposed to that, but I never understood it. I never did it. And I was crying as I was singing this song. I was stood up and I was like, um, you are my strength when I am weak, and you are the treasure that I keep. And I just remember totally feeling the Holy Spirit in a way that I had never felt before. I was so comforted in that moment of rejection. And I just felt like I literally felt like God's arms were so wrapped around me, like, no, 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 I'm not going to let anybody hurt you. And I was reminded in that moment that I didn't go to church for them. I went for him.
Yeah.
They didn't save me. He did. I'm here for him. And I lifted up my hands. I didn't know what else to do. I was just like in full surrender mode. I was just like, I'm here for you. You love me so much. Like, you don't leave me. You don't forsake me. You won't reject me. You won't hurt me. And in doing that, there was one of the women that was worshiping, and she came down from the stage and church was ending. Her name was Kathy. And she says, "Hi, I'm Kathy. And I was so moved by what you did. That doesn't happen here. That I love to lift my hands up, and you encouraged me to do that." I was
Wow.
like, "Oh, thanks. I don't know what came over me. And I was crying because I was still hurt, but I was also moved by God.
Yeah.
And I just felt it came out. And it was just like, I'm really trying to get my life together. And I told the pastor this, and he knows this, but, I got baptized. I'm really trying to live for God, but I have to go back to where I was. He's downstairs, I'm upstairs, but I have to go back and live in that. And I'm trying to get on my feet and go back to school because I had dropped out, years prior. I actually dropped out twice. I tried to go to school homeless. My teachers let me basically register myself without being emancipated.
Hmm.
Like, and the reason I say that is because every single person in my life had a purpose. The girl
Mm.
down the street named Jessie lived
Yeah.
in a cabin, okay? My parents would make me walk to school, and we lived at the end of the Rocky Mountains, and all my siblings got a ride, and they just hated me. I was the target child. And so I would have to walk to school. Jessie would sneak and feed me breakfast and do my hair and take me to school. Nobody knew. There was an older woman down the street, and she would help me, like, let me do yard work and clean her house for money so I could get a dress to go to the dance or get new school clothes.
Yeah.
Like, God was with me throughout. And then, God also, he uses people throughout everything that
Mhm.
we do and every situation. And I remember every person. He reminded me of every single person. And then there's Kathy, and Kathy, in doing that, like I said, I want to go back to school. I want to, I just said it. I was like, I want to get out of this situation that I'm in. And she's like, I can help you. Would you like to come over for lunch? And that's where I met Glenn. I remember us having hot dogs, and they loved my son. They just loved him. Um, and then she took me a couple, round and whatever. We went to go try to find apartments. I couldn't. They invited me to live with them. I was scared out of my freaking mind. I was out of my comfort zone. Okay.
Yeah.
So I knew I was supposed to say yes. I say yes. I go to my ex, and I was like, look, I really want to live for God. You know that. Because we were doing Bible studies every day. He was fasting with me. I was like I said, I was a baby. I was just like excited. I was just like, yes, what
Yeah,
about
on fire.
Bible? I want to know everything. Um, the new faith, the new, refreshing start.
Yes.
And he's like, I totally respect that. I understand that. So I moved in. They got me a room. I mean, God, what was taken from me, my childhood, my teenage years, they put up curtains for me. They helped me buy a laptop for school. They supported me. They helped me do my room. They cooked me dinner. They took care of my
Yeah.
child. I didn't know family like that. I didn't know love like that. And, in that, I was still holding on to my past. And I justified it as I had a kid with this man,
Mhm.
right? So I was still going over there at night, messing around. We were still, doing it, whatever. I
Yeah.
was still not wanting to let that go because that was the only thing I had left. This false security. I was never meant to be with him. Did God use him to get to where I was? For sure. He's a believer. He's going to heaven too. I
Yeah.
believe with all my heart. So in that I got pregnant again. And I
Mm.
was so ashamed because I had just been asked to be the youth pastor because my pastor who saved me retired. He got divorced. And I'm going to talk about everybody's story because I want everybody to know it does not matter. God will
Yeah.
never leave you nor forsake you. So the pastor that saved me got divorced, and they kicked him out of the church. A new pastor came in. He asked me to be the youth pastor. He eventually left. I got pregnant. I didn't tell anybody. Eventually, I started showing. And so I got an apartment. And I told Kathy and Glenn, I was like, look, I got an apartment. It's time for me to move out. I got my GED at that time. I was going to college now. And they helped me with all of that. And then there was a woman named Lynn Blackburn who helped me, tutored me, because I dropped out of school twice. And even that's what I was going to say. The teachers, when I dropped out of school, tried to adopt me. The counselor tried to adopt me. They were like, look, where do you want to go? And I was like, I want to go to Brazil. And they're like, you finished school. I'm taking you to Brazil. My English teacher, because he thought I was the greatest writer. He's like, please don't. But I was so pulled into this other lifestyle, this false security, because it's when I was in high school, it was my ex-girlfriend.
Mhm.
hmm And
Yeah.
so I was just like, still like, that's my security, but
Same
that's my future.
pattern.
But that's my security, but that's my future. Yeah. And it consumed me. I mean, it followed me wherever I went. And I held on to it because I thought there's still part of me that's like, that's what you deserve. That's where you belong. Even when so many opportunities were presented to me that were good, I still felt like I wasn't good enough for it. I
Mhm.
still struggled with that. And but God used teachers and God used counselors and spoke and planted and planted and planted and planted, and showed me love, a little bit more love and a little bit more and a little bit normalcy, because I never had any of that. And
Yeah.
he also did that with Kathy and Glenn, and he did that with the church. And they weren't perfect either, and I wasn't perfect. And eventually, when I couldn't cover it, I got an apartment. They were so excited, like, this is great. It's low income housing apartment. I was so proud of it because they just redone all of it. And I was just like, this is great. And then I remember when I couldn't show up, we went to the house for dinner. I was like, whoop, I'm pregnant. And they were so okay. I was like, okay, okay. All right then. Um, you know, and then I felt in that moment, we have 2 kids. We need to get married. I bought my own ring. I
Yeah.
put it on my finger. But that's what I mean by backslid. And then I was like, we need to get married. We planned the wedding. But I was going to church with this man. We were going every Sunday, but I was so miserable with him. And also he was doing drugs behind my back that I didn't know. I was oblivious. Some addicts are so great at hiding it.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember God was constantly saying, no, Ashley, no. And I was literally telling God, I was like, no, you're going to make me love him. You're going to make me happy with him. I'm going to do it. You're just going to make me happy with him. But then Kathy took me to a movie one night, and she's like, you are really torn about this. Like, she's like, are you happy? Are you excited? I was like, not really, but it's okay. God's going to make me happy. And she's like, no, that's not how this works. She's like, look, my health is declining really bad. And it was. She's like, but I feel like we need to fast one day. I was like, okay. I've never heard this woman say that. And that's when God literally came to me audibly. It was the first time that I had heard his voice audibly, have me sit down, tell me to write. And I just was writing from the words of God about what he said. And then I gave this note of what I wrote to my ex, who has no emotion, and he started crying. Like, it was just powerfully written by God. He knew it. And that's when he moved out. And that's when I knew also God told me, you need to go to another church.
Mm.
I need you to go to another church. And I did. And that's where I met another part of my family who also, church wasn't very healthy, but they played a huge part in my life. They approved of my husband now. I went to them for all things. I knew that I needed to soak myself into them to understand normalcy, and to understand confidence.
Mhm.
And I did that, and they helped, my wedding. They were also a part of this family that I never had. And yeah, that's what I mean by backslid. I got pregnant again, and
Yeah, okay.
God was like, we're going to use this.
Yeah, of course.
I can work with this.
Yeah, he can turn. I heard you say something on one of your last podcasts about how uh, God uses our pain for our purpose.
Yes.
And so he can use anything that the enemy meant for evil for good.
On social media, my brand, I hate marketing. I hate all that stuff. But my brand, my mission is my story.
Yes.
Your mission is your story. Our missions in life are testimonies to shine for what God can do in our life,
Yeah.
because it brings hope, it
Yep.
brings relatability, brings empathy, that no matter what I did, because it wasn't in my power. And I think we as Christians sometimes fall into well, I'm just not ever going to get it right. I've been there. My biggest wrestle was fear of rejection because of
Yeah.
trauma. And I was constantly in fight or flight. I mean, even my marriage at the beginning of years, everybody says it's honeymoon first years. Ours was hell.
Okay.
It was straight up broken. Okay. We're in a better place, but you have 2 broken people. My husband has a strong testimony, and
Mhm.
you're trying to put them together. I
Yeah.
mean, marriage is a reflection of who you really are. It will bring out things in you that you thought you dealt with. I thought I was on, like, everyone's like, that girl loves Jesus and I love Jesus. It's easy when you're by yourself and nobody can hurt
Yep.
you.
Yep.
It's easy. But when you have somebody living in your home who you
Yeah.
got to submit to, who you have to be vulnerable with, oh Lord, that's a whole nother part of healing. But the
For
thing
sure.
is like, God says you're ready for marriage, but in that you're ready to grow in this part of who you are.
Yeah.
And God doesn't always throw everything on us. And he does things in every single period of her life, and he uses it for growth. Like God, we have to see
Yeah.
God as Father. We have to see him as Father, because a father, a real father, doesn't leave their children. They don't abandon their children no matter what we do. Even if we wanted to push them out of our lives, we can't. He loves us way too much. The
Mm,
Bible was for us. The
yeah.
story was for us. And when you understand that, it'll drive you even within mistakes, because transformation comes with love, with
Yeah.
redemption, with love. Um, and when we accept that, when we continue to live in this crappy world and we continue to wrestle with this crappy flesh, we're always going to come back to the Father and not give up and continue and continue and continue to strive and to grow. And as long as that is, I want to be better,
Hmm.
even if I'm not better right now, God's going to get you through it.
I love that so much. I'm actually reading a book right now called The Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller. And
Okay.
so he's like, combating what society has,
Yes.
conditioned us to believe that marriage is, and something that, I read this book, especially when my husband and I are struggling, because I'm like, okay, go back to the foundation. Timothy Keller was a pastor, so, it's all based on the Bible and scripture. And so I read this book whenever we're struggling, and it just like recenters me. Um, and something he said was, marriage is for our sanctification. Like marriage
Yeah.
isn't for like our pleasure or even necessarily our happiness. Like, of course, as our hearts change and we become sanctified and we desire God's will,
It's so good. Yeah.
happiness comes as a result of that. But marriage is for our sanctification, because we're in preparation for eternity. And then you do that with a spouse, and you help prepare each other and yourselves for eternity together. Um,
Yeah.
and so that helps me a lot, because, like you said, my husband and I's first year of marriage was also hell. Everybody talks about the honeymoon phase, and I'm like, did we do something wrong? Because like
Right.
we didn't really have that either. I came in with most of the brokenness, and
Same girl.
yeah, and then with him, I don't know. I feel like my husband was kind of sheltered from the world. He grew up in a really close, like protective family.
So did my husband. He was homecoming king.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like street from Alabama, Detroit. Okay.
Oh
Two
my God.
different, two different. Like,
Yeah,
I totally
exactly.
get it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, we are polar opposites. And so there's been a lot of sanctification in my marriage for sure.
It's
Um,
good though, right? Like it's hard, but it's good because it helps you. It's like it is sanctification because it's giving you. So marriage is helping you grow to another level of your life personally with God.
mm,
You're depending on him on a whole nother level. But you're also, think about it this way. You and I, we do have a similar story. We're guarded. We don't want anybody to love us. And in doing that, like, we're not going to show you love because you're not going to hurt me. That's not going to happen.
I struggle with that. Yeah, for sure.
The struggle is real. I get it.
But it's
Because you learn to,
unconscious.
you're a survivor. And God has
Yeah.
used your survival. He has used that. I don't need anybody. I get it. Like God has brought me to a place where I didn't need anybody. I was going to buy my own house. I love myself. We're great. Boom. Here's your husband.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh. My husband was just telling me too. He's like, because when we go out to do fun stuff, he's like, you're just so independent. He's like, with the other women, you can tell that like they're with their man because they're like touching them, they're holding them. He's like,
I know.
you're like
Yeah.
in la la land, like, looking around. And I'm like, I'll try to like be aware of that. Like, thank you for telling me. But yeah, I, it does. Like a story like ours develops a lot of independence and,
Which
yeah.
isn't bad.
Right. And then
Right.
also guardedness, but I don't even realize when I'm being guarded until we feel like emotionally distant. And then I'm like, wait, am I doing the thing or
Am I the problem?
yeah,
I'm the
exactly.
problem. It's me. I use that song now every time. Like,
I
I'm the
know.
problem. I'm the
Exactly.
villain. Am I the villain? Yeah.
Yeah, is this me?
Yeah. It's a reflection. It's forcing you to put someone before you, which is practice of vulnerability and transparency.
Mm. I'm going to take a quick second here to tell you about Raised and Redeemed merch. I somehow end up in my bright pink, raised and redeemed crew neck nearly every day because it's so comfy, and I love to tell the world that I have been raised and redeemed in Jesus' name. And wearing something that says that is a great conversation starter. Not only do we have crew necks, but we also have t-shirts, hoodies, cropped hoodies, mugs, stickers, socks, and more. You can either follow the link titled Raised and Redeemed Merch in the comment section of wherever you're listening, click the link in any of my social media bios, or go to raisedandredeemed.creator/spring.com, and that is raised and spelled out AND redeemed.creator/spring.com to order yours and support the show today.
And that's what I coach people on with boundaries and inner confidence in Christ. Like that's really my main thing is people learning. I went from a life of love me, everyone, please, I need approval, and to being a puppet to the point that the church I went to, God loved them, I love them, I still love them, but if they said jump, I'm jumping.
Yeah.
They became God to me. And if we're not careful, man can become God. He can be on the throne, even in leadership. If you look for people's approval rather than God's approval, it's dangerous. It becomes an idol.
Yes.
And so we have to get to a place so in depth with God, the love of God, that he never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He's always with us, and knowing really who we are, knowing that, identifying with that, right? We're a daughter of a king. That when people disapprove of you, what does your Father say? What does God say? Because that's the only voice that should matter at the end of the day. Which wraps up why I brought up every single disappointment. The people that God used are the same people that rejected me. But what I learned in that is if I didn't know who I was, I would have took their rejection and I would have thought, God sucks, this sucks, I'm walking away. But I didn't. I was still, God is a redeemer. Man will let me down. God is a redeemer. And so when it came to a whole nother reverse of, okay, God's telling me to do something, but they don't think I could do it. Are you going to believe them? What are you going to do? You're at another rather reverse where it's like, well, God told me to do it, even if you reject me. So it went from understanding rejection to overcoming rejection to continue into the plan of God. And it's absolutely freeing when you are not looking for the approval of the world, and it is ultimately all about God. You are a freaking powerhouse that the enemy does not want to live.
Can you break that down for us a little bit on?
Is it a lot?
Yeah, but like, how do you, like, I get it theoretically, I so get it, but then like how to actually do that. I know you have a couple of podcasts, like one where you were sharing like mantras, for instance, because this all ties in. You were saying you were sharing mantras for telling people no or setting boundaries, because like this people pleasing thing, finding or like idolizing people and putting them in the place of God rather than realizing, like my worth is in being his daughter. It's like
I was forced to only practical. I love practical. I was so exhausted by not being able to get the approval that I longed for with the people that I admired in this church. It was a toxic environment. It was just not good. My husband worked there. It almost cost my marriage. I was so exhausted. I was at a place where it's like, never going to be good enough. And if I continue trying to be good enough for these people, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to. So I was forced to know who God was. So really it starts there. So practical is, because it's so easier said than done. Well, you don't need their approval, live empowered. But there needs to be an acceptance. A few things. First, we do need to accept the fact that we want man's approval. We want to be approved. We want to be needed. And it doesn't even come from, it comes from that word. We're trained that way as a child with our kindergarten teacher, with the girls that didn't like our picture. So there's already things implanted in us when you were the mother of your family. So you were expected to be a certain level than if you had siblings, right? So you're expected, I have to care for my mother.
Yeah.
So you're already trained in your brain to get approval from other people that
Yeah.
you admire, that you love, even maybe that you don't, because you're afraid of what they might think of you, because maybe someone in your life said, don't do that because they're going to look at you funny, right?
Mhm.
So you're already trained. So really, you really have to like sit back for a little bit and ask yourself, where did this start? And then accept the fact that, okay, I care what people think, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Now, where do I take that the fact that I care so much and I want to belong so much? Where do I direct that? Well, to God. Well, what does that look like? So it's really getting in His Word for yourself,
Mhm.
not through someone else.
Yeah.
So the church is for fellowship. The church is for fellowshipping with other believers, worshiping with other believers. It is one day a week. You are not going to grow your relationship with God on a Sunday. I'm sorry, you're not.
Mhm.
You have got to do that all by yourself. You've got to do that on your own. And that is through the Bible. And there's so many resources out there that help you do that. And so, really, it's discovering what the Word says and helping you understand the Word is, the Bible app for free and doing
Yeah.
devotionals. That's what really ultimately helped me understand the Word, was doing that. Um, and then prayer, praying to God, talking to God. Well, prayer is not a normal language for people that are just discovering God. It's really weird for them. And
Mhm.
so I always tell people to pray like I'm talking to you,
Yep.
not in the closet. We're not in the war room. The war is all around us. So
Yeah.
pray while you're cleaning the kitchen. Turn on worship music. And then use your imagination. God says in the Bible to have faith like a child, and if you
Mhm.
don't have faith like a child, then you can't enter the kingdom of God. Well, children have a great imagination, right?
Yeah.
Like, they tell us the best stories. And so you have to come back as a child. So you're not only looking at yourself, you're not only like looking at, okay, that's where it started, that's who I am, but you also have to go back to a childlike, like, that's my Father in heaven. He
Mhm.
loves me, he's proud of me. Like, I'm proud. And then tell yourself every day, talk, discipline yourself. Today, even today, I had to like tell myself to shut up. I
Yeah.
started to get into this negative, like, self-pity mode, and I was like, no, turn on your worship music, do
Mhm.
your workout, get in the shower. You can do this. You
Yes.
are loved. God didn't leave you. God's not ashamed of you. I
Mhm.
had to tell my brain that. I had to say it
Yeah.
out of my mouth. So you have to like speak to yourself. And it may seem weird, but you have to like it, I don't care if you're in cradle position. I am confident. I am a child of God. I make my kids do that every morning. They have to speak out affirmations
Well, and
until they
that's so
believe
good
it.
too. Like going back to your childhood, a lot of what was spoken over you, you ended up becoming for the worse at first until you were saved and realized whose you were. So the fact that you have your kids doing that from a young age, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then the boundaries aspect. So it's with people in general. No is a beautiful word. It really is. And so you have to, this is why I love marriage. This is where marriage is really fun. This is where it's really fun, because your husband is a part of that boundary with you. So always go to if you have a spouse, always go to him. Always, because he's going to help you create these boundaries. So you have to this is where you kind of have to be selfish with God. If it doesn't like, if it feels like you're burning out, listen to your body, listen to your mind. Like, if you feel like you're doing something volunteer work and it's just miserable, like, it's not even that you're uncomfortable, but you're miserable, and you're realizing, I'm doing this because of why. Ask yourself, why am I doing this for this person? Why am I saying yes to this person? Has nothing to do with God. Has nothing to do with God. Has everything to do with them. And so really kind of reflect on your life. Like, if it's taking away from your marriage, if it's
Mhm.
taking away from your children, if it is taking away from your time with God, then you probably need to evaluate that and set some boundaries.
Yeah.
Like, say no. Set this time apart. This is only the time that I have for God. This is only the time that I have for my children. This is only the time that, I don't, you have things that you don't compromise. Maybe it's church on Sunday. I don't compromise church on Sunday. I
Yeah.
don't compromise my date nights. I don't compromise my TV time at night with my spouse. I don't compromise that time. Like, you have to be able to
That's
create these healthy boundaries, which helps you be confident because now you've taken your life back. It's not in someone else's hands anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's in your hands,
Yeah.
and you have control.
I started practicing that after listening to your podcast, where I remember like going into work and I was like, I remember like my boss, for some reason, like, the people pleasing can especially show up with a boss.
Oh, yeah.
And he kind of just like says things, brushes it off, whatever, like nothing I say feels important. And I went into his office and I asked him something and he was like, "Oh, maybe I'll get to it like later," or something like this. And I was like, "Okay." And I like started to walk out feeling defeated. And then I turned around and I was like, "Actually, like I need to know by EOD because this is important." And he was like, "Okay, I'll get it to you by EOD." And that
Good
was
for
one way.
you.
Yeah, that was one way I practiced it. And then I also practiced it in my women's Bible study because I would always get, and that's a good thing too. Like, and it can be too much of a good thing. Like,
It can be, yeah, things seem good. Church Bible studies seem good. Get-togethers seem good, but there still has to be a boundary in it.
yes. So I showed up and I was like, I have to leave at this time because I would always get pulled aside and pulled into all these conversations and I'd be exhausted and miserable and
Yeah.
mosquitoes are biting me.
Yeah.
And my husband's like, "Why do you stand there and just like deal with it?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't want to like offend anybody."
It's
So
uncomfortable to say like, "Hey, I gotta go.
I
It was
gotta
so nice talking to
go.
you." And there's a way to do it. There's a
Yeah.
way to be like, "Hey, I gotta go. I'll see you next Bible study." And here's the thing, don't over-explain yourself. You don't
Mm,
even have to tell them about your spouse. Just be like, "Hey, I gotta go. Have a great day. Hey,
yeah.
I can't go to dinner tonight." Like, even when I have to reschedule meetings, like, unless, like, I'm cool with you, like, it'll be brief. Like, there was 2 interviews I had to reschedule the other day when I rescheduled yours, and I
Uh-huh.
got more into an explanation with you because I felt like I said, I feel like we're friends,
Yeah.
rather than there were other people, I was like, "Hey, I have something in my family. We're gonna have to reschedule. I'm sorry."
Yeah. Period.
Period. It's so freeing once you do it. It seems intimidating because you're retraining your brain.
For sure. And like you said too, it's like you develop this, especially as a kid that grew up with abuse, because it's your only way to survive a lot of
Yeah.
times. So that leads me into I have one more question before the final question, and that is, okay, so how do you know the difference between a feeling of guilt and a conviction of the Holy Spirit? Especially, going back to the root of like growing up with abuse and mental abuse, gaslighting, where you
Yeah.
take on so much, like you always like kind of blame yourself. And then for me, I notice like it's really hard for me to tell the difference. Like, should I actually feel guilty about that? Or I don't know if I'm wording that right.
No,
Like,
I think this is a great question. Like,
okay.
is this like healthy conviction or if this is like like
Yes.
inner negative dialogue,
Yes.
negative self-talk? Is well, to understand the difference between guilt and conviction is to take the time to understand what guilt feels like. The
Mm,
fact that for me, like conviction, um, is never going to feel like guilt ever. Conviction is never going to feel like you're not good enough. You're never going to have that thought. So you really need to understand the language, like the where you're at. You need to embrace your feelings. And that's so hard. People do not understand how they feel. They don't understand the language of how they feel. So if we start with conviction, conviction feels like love. It feels like correction.
mm,
Conviction feels like I want to be better because I love you, not I have to be better or you're not going to love me. Do you see
okay.
what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So guilt is you're not going to like this if I don't do this. I'm not going to be good enough if I don't do this. That's guilt, right? Like,
mm,
but, or I'm sorry, guilt. Conviction is I love myself enough that I want to be better. I love you enough that I'm going to be better. So if we think about it with parenting, mom guilt is such a big issue. And so you struggle with not being enough, but you have to step back. Okay, this is the practical part of it. So if I feel like, oh my God, that mom is giving her kids all the freaking organic food, you can do 2 things, right? You can either minimize them and be like, well, they probably have this and this and this, and you create this image in your head that they have to be doing something that you just can't do, which we
yeah,
don't want to do. We don't want to cut other women down. That's not healthy either. So you have to step back and be like, you know what? Are my kids loved? Yes. Do I always strive to be the best I can? Yes. Do my kids love me? Yes. Are they safe? Yes. Are my kids happy? Yes. I'm a great mom. I'm a good mom. Because the standard of Christianity, the standard of motherhood, the standard of wifehood, is that from the world standard? Where did you even get that standard? Ask yourself that question. Or is that from a godly standard?
Yeah, that's good.
Right?
That's good. Going back to like the only thing that could have changed us was God's love. His redemption feels like love, and then that's conviction of the Holy Spirit. I want to be better. Not that condemnation, that
Do
negative.
you condemn your children? I always bring it back to motherhood. Think about it that way. Are you going to guilt your children into not doing something? Think about it this way. You spill a glass of milk, okay? Your child spills a glass of milk. Are you going to go to them and be like, oh my gosh, you're so freaking clumsy. You do this all the time. Do not spill your milk ever again. How do you
Right.
think they're going to feel?
Yeah.
Or, okay, are you going to go to your child and be like, oh, it was an accident. You know, it was an accident. Oh, it's okay. We're going to clean it up. It's really easy to clean up. Let's just maybe set our cup this way. Or, you know what? It's my fault. I gave you a glass. Let me give you a sippy cup and put a lid on. What do you think about a straw? Right? That's conviction. Your child already feels bad for spilling the milk, but we have come up with a solution, and it does not devalue the love of that relationship.
That's good.
Right?
Okay, I have one more question for you. We're starting to run out of time here. I could talk to you all day.
We could
There's
do
so
two
much more.
parts. We'll do 2 parts.
Yes.
You could do 2 parts of your series.
So just to, end this part, what would be the last, or if you could go back and tell your little girl self anything, what would you go back and tell her?
I actually wrote a letter to her in therapy. I would tell her that she deserves love. I would tell her that she deserves love. That's what I would tell her.
Yeah.
That's it. Because in that, when I go back to that and I think of her, I think when I can tell her, hey, you deserve love, it sets a healthy pride in her. Like, I do.
Yeah.
I do deserve love. Love is all good things of God.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And just the last thing, would you mind sharing with the listeners where they can find you and hear more of your podcasts?
Yeah, so I love social media for the most part. So you can find me on Instagram at ashley.henriot, TikTok Ashley Henriot. I have freebies on my website, where 5 days to a more confident you devotional and guide. I have a whole thing of how to find your tribe, your people. And then also you can find my podcast on YouTube, Confidence and Coffee, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And I would love to connect with you. I love connecting with people. And I hope that you grab some freebies, and I can see you after you listen to this and hear your story as well.
That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this show, I'd love to have you leave a review, share it with a friend, and even connect with me on other platforms. It's at Michaela Nikolenko on Instagram and TikTok, and we also have an at Raised and Redeemed Instagram account too. I look forward to connecting with you there. Until next time, stay well and God bless you.